Hello, and welcome to the Product Insiders LinkedIn Live series, in which we interview product leaders and learn how they leveraged customer insights to navigate tough product decisions. I'm your host, Zach Lyons, Managing Partner of Agile Innovation Advisors. If you're joining us live today, can you please enter where you're from in the chat so we know who is with us? And today, our special guest is Gopinath Durairaj. Oh man, I tried that a couple times ahead of time. Durairaj. Sorry.
Perfect.
Got it on the third try. And Gopinath is currently Senior Director of Product Management at Lookout. And we'll be asking Gopinath some questions, but if you have any specific questions for him, please enter them in the chat and we'll get to them in a bit. So with that, let's begin. Gopinath, thank you so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Zach, for giving the opportunity to be part of your show.
Oh, yeah, of course. I'm glad you were able to take some time out of your busy day. Really do appreciate it. So thinking about a tough product decision you've had to navigate, can you please tell us about your role at the time and the situation?
Sure, Zach. So I had joined at that time my previous employer. It was first few weeks into the job. Obviously you're trying to understand what the product is, how it's doing well with the customers or issues and things like that. The realization was that, hey, there were sales stalling, revenues declining year over year, things like that, right? So then you start digging into the situation, trying to understand what are the root causes, right? Just like every other product leader, this is how do you get answers, right? This is where you have to go to the customers to get the answers to the problems that you have, right? Most of them start there. So that's sort of the situation overall.
Got it. Okay. And so what was the challenge or issue we were trying to overcome? Obviously sales slowing, but what was difficult about that challenge for you?
So this is sort of the symptom of the situation, right? Going under the hood, started talking to a lot of customers. The first things we uncovered were mostly around the usual suspects, right? Whether there is something wrong with the product in terms of maybe lacking scalability in this particular instance and some quality issues, right? This is what we initially found, right? We started going to a lot of customers to, understand the extent of the problem and put together solutions, right, to go and execute on it. So that is sort of the initial approach that we had done, which all seems obvious. You find a problem, you try to understand it, diagnose it, and then try to fix it, right? So we basically stopped all new feature development, put all the engineering effort into the scale and quality issues. That we thought was going to solve the problem. That's sort of the initial setup. Go ahead. I think then we can go into the next step. This is obviously not the actual problem. There's more behind.
Maybe just for the listeners, if maybe I don't get too technical. I know it was a technical product, right? But maybe just a little background on the way you talked about the scalability. Maybe just a little bit about the product itself.
I can talk a little bit about the product, and then this will probably become obvious. So this is a WAN optimization product. So the way it works is it sits, between two locations. Let's say a branch and then a head end, a data center. Typically deployed like a hub and spoke, right? All the branches connect to the data center. Okay. So you see the appliances that sit in the data center will have to address the connections that are coming from so many branches, right? So that becomes the scalability bottleneck, if you will, right? So what this appliance does is it compresses the traffic and makes sure that it can be transmitted over some very narrow pipes, right? At those days, people were using MPLS, multi-protocol label switching, kind of enterprise technology between their branches and their data center. These are sort of the private networking, right?
Okay.
So those lines were expensive. So, and a lot of places you don't even get to very high bandwidth lines. So you have to make sure all your traffic is to be compressed and sent over those thin wires. So that is on the branch side. On the data center side, obviously, if you have to cater to a lot of branches, it needs to be scalable. So we were running into issues at the scalability at the head end. Some of our appliances were tapping out, and so we could not address some of the larger deployments. And even in existing deployments, as the traffic grows, we are tapped out at the head end. And besides the quality issues, yeah.
So customers leaving because of those issues, the
Yeah,
quality
customers were
issues.
not able to expand, and some cases they didn't see a path forward, so they were obviously not renewing or moving away to alternate solutions, things like that.
Uh, so they're moving into alternate solutions that were working better. So what? So I'm curious. Like, what did you do? Like, what? How did you go about fixing this
Yeah, so
challenge
it's
issue?
basically the first wave, as I explained, was put plans in place for addressing the scalability, by deploying
Okay.
some alternate architectures, using virtualized instances, within an appliance, some way to quickly scale up, right, and address those challenges. But that was just the first layer, right? So once we address this and get back to the customers, yes, you stabilize sort of the immediate problems, and that is where you know additional customer insights we were able to uncover uh, by having deeper conversations, right? So as you develop the relationship with the customer, now you can ask them, okay, where are they going with this, right? In terms of the deployment and in terms of the value that we are providing from the product, and how is their business overall, what's happening in their environment in terms of applications staying in the data center, or they're moving to the cloud, things like that. And what does it mean for our product line and the use cases and the value that we are providing, right? So we started uncovering those trends, in the customers. And then we were asking, what does it mean, for this deployment or the use case that we are trying to address? Do they still see the value, right, in what we are delivering, and what more that we should be looking into, right? So that is where we started developing those insights that the applications were actually moving from a data center to the cloud, and uh, they no longer see the value in compressing the traffic and sending it over those pipes, uh, you know and combine that with the desire to use internet links instead of the private network, the MPLS that I was talking
Mm.
about. So in short, all the components of the solution were moving away from the
Hmm.
current to the future, right? The data center is opening up, the applications are moving out, the links are changing, right? And then the compression benefit that we are providing also was going down. They were not seeing us good compression ratios
Hmm.
anymore, right? So that's where the question on the wall is, okay, then what is the future of this business, this whole
Hmm.
category of products, right? Even if we fix
Right.
it, even if I fix the scale, even if we fix the quality, where is it going from here?
Hmm.
That's the big question, right? So then we have to come back and ask the question ourselves, what is the value that we are providing to the customer? Is it just this WAN optimization, compression benefit, or are we in the business of delivering applications for the customer in the best quality and the reliability? And then taking a step back and seeing what is the job to be, addressed here, right? So if you ask yourself
Great.
all those questions,
Can
that's
I ask
when,
you? Can
yeah,
I ask you? I just interrupt you real quick. Like, how did you figure that out? Were you doing customer interviews yourself?
it's all
Were you
customer
looking at
interviews. Yeah,
customer interviews? Okay,
yes.
yourself. You were leading those.
Yeah, I was leading some of them as well, and then I was having other PMs in my team form out and start asking these questions, because
Okay.
first few things, I was doing it myself, and I was starting to see the pattern, right? Then we had to expand to the entire customer base, and we had prepared these open-ended questions, and what to ask and what to look for, things like that. Then we had let other PMs in the team as well to go off and have those customer conversations.
Oh, I see. Okay. So you enlisted the entire team. That's great. And were they all, you mentioned you were using jobs to be done approach to ask customer these questions. Were they all trained in this, or did people just go off
No,
and
they were
kind of?
not trained in this, but but the key is, okay, what are we in the business of, right? I think that's the question that every
Mm,
PM should ask themselves, right? Am I in the business of just developing this particular product or this particular approach or whatever, right? Or take
mhm.
a step back and see what's the customer outcome that we are trying to achieve, and is the approach that I'm doing, is this still the right approach for the customer, right?
I love it. Good. So you thought about the outcome, and then you asked some questions around what is the customer looking to do, or what are they looking for as they go forward, the trends, as you mentioned, and then
Yeah.
thinking
So
about.
in the new environment, on the future looking environment, where the applications are distributed, majority sitting in the cloud and some in the data
Yeah.
center. So in that environment where they want to use a mix of internet and MPLS, and where the problem is mostly around reliability and flexibility of connections, right, and resilience, rather than the compression, right? So then the problem shifts, right? And so you have to come up with a different solution to solve the problem.
So so what was the result? Like, what happened? What decision did you come to?
So we basically went back to the first principles, right? So we asked us, okay, now is this, so if this is the new problem to be solved, what
Hmm.
does the solution look like, right? Just leave out what we know, what we have in the bag, but then if I have to solve the customer's problem, what should the new you know approach look like, and what are the requirements? So then we hashed out a different architecture, different approach, that did not need any WAN optimization, right? Um, and at that time, that category even did not exist. And later on, after we formulated this and we identified options to go build it and all that, by that time, Gartner and the analysts started coming out with a term for this new category. It's called SD-WAN, software defined wide area
Okay.
network. So we were ahead of the curve in some sense.
But so was this technology that was already being developed internally, or just being played with? And then as a PM, you said, okay, there's changes in the market. Now I can bring this technology to bear on this problem and solve the customer issue better than the
Yeah,
past
it was not
technology.
in house actually.
Okay.
Um, Once we understood what we need to do, then we started looking at buy versus build, right? Just like every PM, we
Sure.
first have to see if this is off the shelf somewhere that I can just pick it up, rather than trying to build it myself. And so we identified some components that were existing, right, in some form, that we could use as a building block, not try to reinvent the wheel. But the rest of it was fairly new, even at that time. So we had to put together a plan, uh, to acquire, license, whatever it takes to get some building blocks into the house, and then build the rest of the solution around it.
Gotcha. Okay. All driven by this insight that you'd
All
gathered.
driven by the insight. I think that's the key, right?
And I
So
actually think
once
it's
you,
interesting
yeah,
that you were using jobs to be done, and I think you're just, but you weren't necessarily trained in it, but thinking in
no,
terms of what is it the customer's trying to achieve, and then what value are we creating. So just thinking in those terms, and then asking open-ended questions
correct.
to reveal kind of where they're going, and then what technology you can bring to bear to help them. That was helpful, just that itself. So I actually
Yeah.
find that interesting.
Actually, thinking back, I wasn't formally introduced to the jobs to be done framework at that time. I just asked those questions and
Ah,
asked myself, what should I be doing? What's the right thing to do for the
okay.
customer?
you understood the concept inherently without even knowing it, and then later on put
Probably
a label on what it was. Okay.
without having the framework or a theoretical whatever.
And did the business start growing as a result, or how did things
Yeah, it
change?
was a long journey from that conceptualization to building a product and building a business around it. Took
Okay.
a while. Had to convince the leadership to pivot, right? And why we should pivot, right? If we don't do it,
Right.
what happens? And then getting the investments to build it in a smaller scale first, put it in front of the customers, get some feedback, iterate. And good news is by the time the market saw it, there were two or three other startups who were actually onto the same, product category, and the analysts started putting larger and larger market size estimates and growth estimates, right? So over that 2-3 years time frame, couple of years I think it took for us to get the product fully in the market. By the time it was already getting mind share, so then it became a little bit easier for us to explain to the customers what we are doing and what the value is and all that.
Mm. And I guess also getting stakeholders on board internally,
Getting
right? It's like
stakeholders, yeah.
you saw the market starting to grow, so it must have been easier to get resources to
It's
keep.
easier to add more resources once there is market validation of what we are trying to do. Yes.
Yeah, it's a holy grail question, right? Like, okay, we're gonna spend X amount of dollars to build this, but what's the return on that, right? What's the benefit we're gonna get as a business? So without a good understanding of the market, especially a nascent market that just starting, can be a tough business case to prove.
Right.
Very
It was
interesting.
still
So
based on the promise at that time of a larger market and potentially open, which was basically we were competing against startups, so there is a viable path forward for us to go build that
mm,
business out. So that's when the investments were made. Yeah.
gotcha. Okay. So I'd love to ask this question, the retrospective, right? What would you do differently based on the learnings, what you went through? How would
Yeah, a
you
couple things actually, right? Now that we think back, the first is, don't be shy about asking questions. Usually when you go in first, you know, just want to solve the customer's immediate problem, and therefore you just, you know, uh, restrict your questioning to those things.
Mhm.
My case, I was trying to understand, why they are not happy with the product. So we just went into, the quality issues or scale issues or things like that. So they were, a little bit having blinders. Uh, um,
Hmm.
but if we were to start asking more open-ended questions, okay, once I solve this, then where do you see this going, right? Things like that. And the questions that I asked later could have been asked in the beginning, right? Could have uh, gotten to the conclusion, much better, much faster. That is one aspect. The second aspect is, you know also looking at the organizational capabilities. Even if I build a product, right, um, do we have the right go to market routes to market apparatus in place? If not, how should we tackle that, right? Should we
Okay.
go build the organization to sell the product,
Mm.
or do I need to somehow build the product that this organization can sell, right? Either way you can you can do that.
Oh,
You have to match the product also to your routes to market, right? That's the issue. So a lot of companies, they spin off, into its own identity, so that you're not stuck with the parents labeling, and you're free to assemble the team, to the routes to market that it needs, and not hindered by the parent. That,
you
that's
think that's a good approach, or is it
I
better
think
to?
that's a better approach. In hindsight,
Yeah.
we would have benefited from that approach, because we were struggling
Okay.
to shake off the label, and we were never seen as a pure networking player. So
Oh,
the success wasn't as much as we had hoped for. So given our early entrance and given the product strength, we were expecting a much bigger success than what we landed, and that
Hmm.
primary reason was this gap, I would say, between the routes to market design and the product.
So it's how the company was currently positioned in the minds of the customer. You guys were trying to change the approach, but
Change
it's
that, right?
hard to change people's mindset.
Hard to change, exactly. We are
Yeah.
not
I mean,
seen as a player in that part of the market, and you know, there was a lot of struggle.
interesting. Yeah. Well, that's a fascinating story. Wow. Well, thank you so much. Really do appreciate you sharing your story, what you did, and the learnings along the way. I'm going to ask to see if anyone else is of it online right now that wants to ask a question. Go ahead and type in the chat. I know there's a slight delay, so enter your question and we can get Gopinath to answer the question. If not, I will say that this will stay as a post on LinkedIn, so you can always ask a question later on, and everyone will get it. We can chime in just like any other LinkedIn live post. And so I'm hoping that if you listened in today, you learned at least one new thing from the conversation. And we do have a question. So someone said, I have a question, so I'm waiting for the question to come in. We won't end yet. We're still waiting for their question. Are you still working in a similar industry as you were, or
Slightly
is it?
different. So I moved from more of networking and application delivery into more cybersecurity right now.
Okay. We have an anonymous question, but here it is. How do you measure success for the product?
Different yardsticks, right? From a revenue perspective, that's
Okay.
not of the ultimate sort of business level measurement, right? How well you're hitting your revenue targets. But to me, success for the product is if it solves the customer problem, what you set out to solve really well, right? That's sort of the product side of it, right?
And do you have certain metrics you use to determine that?
Usually, it is the NPS scores that we use. Um, Sometimes it's very rigorous, sometimes it's more qualitative, right? So you have to take that both sides of it, the quantitative NPS scores along with the qualitative response that the customer provides.
Okay. So NPS. If you use jobs to be done, I've seen companies do this quite successfully where there's a specific job they're trying to help them do, and they'll measure satisfaction on that job sort of before a new solution, right? And then look at later on in the market after a new product or service has been introduced to say, okay, how has satisfaction changed on it? That's another way I've seen some companies. So using the same metric, the job, and say, okay, how satisfied is it before the solution and then after? It could be another approach. And that's one of the benefits of jobs to be done. It acts almost like a ruler or a yardstick, right? Where you can keep measuring
I
the
like that.
market.
Yeah, I think that would be a good way to measure it. Yes.
Okay. And the user said, thank you. So appreciate it. I don't see any other questions coming in. So we can wrap up with that. So again, feel free to continue the discussion, entering your comments or questions in the chat. And also, please stay tuned for our next Product Insiders event right here on LinkedIn. And until next time, I'm your host, Zach Lyons with Agile Innovation Advisors. So take care.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Oh, okay.